is because so many people take it to relieve anxiety. We worry about a lot of things: what's happening in the world, what's happening in our own society, the breakdown of civil behavior, and we also worry about our own lives. What will happen to us as we get older? Do we have the financial resources we need? Will we always have a place to live? The list goes on and on. The passage that was read from Luke is virtually identical to a passage in Matthew. I mention that only because Bible scholars will tell you that if things are repeated in multiple Gospels, they tend to be more accurate as to what Jesus really said. It follows Jesus' admonition to the rich fool about storing up possessions in this world rather than storing them up for the next. In that parable, he warns us that we never know when the end will come, so storing up possessions is no guarantee of security or safety because we simply don't know when the end will come. It could come tomorrow, it could come in the future. We are better off storing our treasures in heaven by preparing ourselves and living a life that makes us ready for when the end times do come. So in this passage from Luke, Jesus is telling his disciples not to worry about things, not to worry about what they will wear or what they will eat, and making analogies to the wild things and how God takes care of them, to remind them that as we are more important in God's sight, that if he takes so much care of the lilies and dresses them so beautifully, he will take care of them. But how do you interpret this? Does this mean we just don't have to think about the future? We can simply trust that God will do everything for us? I don't think that's exactly what Jesus was trying to say. I think particularly if you look at the last verse, what he's really saying, again, is to store your possessions in heaven. It's not a matter that you can do nothing and God will just automatically find and take care of you, automatically feed you and clothe you and house you. It's just that you shouldn't be so focused on those things for today. You should be more focused on the future in heaven. So what this passage says, as far as I interpret it, is that if we trust in God, things will go okay. I think this passage is a great summary of what faith really is. There is no need to be anxious about the everyday things in life if you have faith. We're not relieved at all of the responsibility of taking care of ourselves and our families, but we shouldn't be crippled by anxiety about the future. Now, this kind of faith is harder to illustrate than simply talking about belief. It comes from a deeper place, and it's really more about trusting that God will lead you to the right place than it is about simply saying, I believe in God, or I believe in Jesus, or I believe in any of the many things we all profess to believe regularly. It's more subtle. It comes from deep inside, and it manifests itself in your ability to go through life without needing Xanax. It doesn't mean you never worry. It doesn't mean you're never concerned. It doesn't mean you're not responsible for life. What it does mean is that you can deal with what comes up knowing that God will take care of you. It means that when you come to decisions in life, you can be confident that if you pray and listen, you'll be guided to the right choice. It also means that when things happen in life, you can take comfort in knowing, if you really have faith, that those things are in fact the right things that are happening. Now, I want to illustrate this with something that happened to me recently. It also is a way to make sure everyone involved in the church knows what's going on. But it also points out and allows me to let you know what's going on and at the same time assure you that I'm okay. About 2 months ago, I was diagnosed with a particularly aggressive form of prostate cancer. Now, luckily, or is it luck in context of what I'm saying here, it was caught before it started to metastasize. It was caught largely by chance or by God's inspiration, because it occurred to me I hadn't had a PSA test in many years, as they aren't done as regularly as they used to be. So I asked my doctor to include one on my next set of blood work. It came back extremely high, so I had a virtually instantaneous biopsy, which came back not just positive, but unfortunately an 8 on the scale of 8 of cancer. But again, after doing a PET scan, we determined it hadn't spread at all, which was the major thing. Prostate cancer is generally curable if it hasn't metastasized. So I've started aggressive hormone therapy, which is designed to drive the level of testosterone in my body down to 0, because prostate cancer apparently feeds on testosterone. This is far better than having to have chemotherapy. I sleep 20 hours a day now, but some people say that's pretty, they'd like to be able to do that. Oh, that's a little tiring. But that's what it really does. And in February, I will start 9 weeks of radiation therapy, which should destroy the cancer and, as far as the radiation oncologist tells me, should cure it. We'll see. But the doctors do think the prognosis is good, as prostate cancer is quite curable as long as it hasn't metastasized, which it hadn't. So that's what's going on with me personally, so you all know. I should be here as always. I'm pretty wiped out from the hormone therapy. And when a friend of mine, Joanne, has had radiation therapy for breast cancer, said, well, wait till you get the radiation. That'll really wipe you out. And I said, thanks. But I said to the oncologist, as a young woman who's very, very good, she said, no, you're already wiped out. It can't make it any worse. So I should still just be sleeping 20 hours a day in February for 9 weeks. Now, I wanted to explain this, besides updating people, as how faith comes into your life and into things like this that happen to you. You know, I often joke that I dealt with my mortality in 1985 when I was diagnosed HIV positive and there were no treatments. The reality of it is that I've learned through faith through my life that what happens to me is generally what should happen to me. In other words, it generally works out well. It's not always what I would have choose to have happen. That's the important distinction. What you want to have happen may not be what happens. That doesn't make what happens the wrong thing, if you follow that somewhat convoluted logic. You don't always get what you want, but what you want isn't always the best thing for you. And that's where God will help guide you if you listen. I know things will work out the way they should. I wouldn't have chosen to have cancer. I know that I'm getting great medical care. I know that I have support systems. I know that whatever happens, God is with me, and that God cares for what happens to me, and that worrying about it only accomplishes nothing. That's the key to the passage that Jesus was trying to message to his disciples. Worrying about it accomplishes little, and all it does is make life unpleasant. So it's unpleasant enough to have to go to the doctors and then go every day for 9 weeks, but it doesn't do any good to worry about it. It doesn't make me feel any better. In fact, it probably makes me feel worse. Prostate cancer is a largely symptomless disease. Radiation therapy is largely painless, but deep-rooted anxiety and fear about what is going on would be far more devastating than the actual disease in terms of my being able to live my life to the fullest. That's the key. That is what Jesus is saying to his disciples. Not don't be responsible for things, don't make plans, don't not worry, but don't become so anxious that it becomes your focus. Throughout the New Testament, it said, Bible scholars argue about this, but that about 100 times Jesus commands his disciples not to have fear, to have no fear, or do not worry, do not be afraid. In fact, when Jesus says, often, I give you my peace, and in the end when he says, I give you my peace I leave with you, what he's talking about is the gift of peace in our heads, biblical Xanax, so to speak. Like everything in life, there's a catch in what I'm saying, because faith that brings you peace is not something you get simply by saying, I believe. It takes time. It takes time because you have to see it at work. It starts by saying, I believe, certainly, and it grows as you see in your life the impact of that faith. And when you look for God's actions in your life, you often see them. You've often heard me say that I think you have to look and listen and pay attention to be aware of God's actions in your life. I also say it doesn't help to pray to win the lottery, and I can tell you from personal experience it doesn't. But nonetheless, that's not the point. The point is not today. The point is knowing that you're being taken care of. It's easy to overlook the fact once a crisis passes in life and not notice how it played out. And that often you will think, when you think back, you'll find that the way it turned out was okay, or was for the best, even though you didn't realize it at the time. And that was from God helping you and God watching over you, as Jesus is saying. It takes time, and that's the only answer. But because faith in this usage is very similar to trust. What Jesus is saying in these passages, what I'm saying, is that trusting God is the way in which faith manifests itself, and the way in which faith really can impact your life. For many people, faith means believing, and it does. But it goes further than that if you build on your faith by trusting God. It's one thing to believe Jesus said certain things. It's another thing to have trust that God will manage the future for you. In Mark chapter 4, a passage we're all familiar with, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, and I imagine a bit pissed off from having had a nap for the first time in quite a while. He rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" That's the same message. Now, Jesus was able to sleep. He wasn't worried. And the disciples shouldn't have been worried either. He certainly would take care of them. In the case of Jesus, the God was with them. But the same idea is true of God the Father, that he will watch over you. There's nothing we can do that changes what's going to happen. We can take the universalist view, which says everyone goes to heaven in the end, which is, I think, a little troubling. But the idea is that faith is what matters. And the only thing that matters, and if you recall, in many Protestant faiths, salvation by faith alone, that's the only thing that saves you. The Catholics take a more middle-of-the-road position, which says you must have faith and do good works. But no matter what theology you buy into, from the extreme Calvinistic view of double predestination to the universalist view that says in the end everyone goes to heaven, no matter which of those you believe in, they're all really beyond your control. All you can do is live the best you can, follow the teachings of God through Jesus or Buddha or whatever source you use. After all, we know they all have in common the same basic golden rule about how to live a good life. But don't spend your time worrying about the future. Don't become so ridden with anxiety that you can't live your life. While you have time to live, live. You all know that I say that often because I believe it so firmly. The key to this passage, and to me, is the key to a good life. It's the benefit of being faithful. The gift that God gives us is the ability to live our lives and not be constantly worried about what will happen tomorrow. You may be thinking, well, it's awfully easy to say, Joe. And I guess it is, except I know it's real from experience. I know that worrying and having anxiety doesn't do anything to change what's going on or what's going to happen, and that my faith and my trust in God allows me to continue to do what I do every day, being responsible but not anxious. And that's the greatest gift I think you can get out of understanding what faith means. Your life will be so much better if you can find it in your heart to trust the future to God and only worry about today. I know that for me, I'm no more upset today about having prostate cancer than I was before I had that PSA test. It's a serious issue, but it's not something that I'm going to stop doing the things I like to do, stop being here with you people, because it cripples me. And that's the message that comes from real faith in a practical way, on a practical day-to-day basis. And I hope that looking at this passage, there are many others like it, but this passage in particular we're so familiar with, will help remind us of that as we go through our own daily crises, our own daily events we have to worry about. We can know that, well, I'll worry about today, but tomorrow will take care of itself.